Hello everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in to ChasingCinema.com's official YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Tiranno, and this is a Week 6 update of my 365-day movie challenge. So that means I've watched a lot of movies. So far, again, there hasn't been a real bump in the road yet. Yeah, sometimes I gotta stay up extra late to watch a movie, but I haven't come to a point where I've hit a rock or been like, oh man, do I really regret doing this decision? But again, I'm only 6 out of 52 weeks in, so, there's a lot of time left to go. Let's talk about what I watched in Week 6, beginning with Blackfish, a documentary that came out in 2013. A movie that I've kind of wanted to see as much as I didn't want to see. Things with animals and sometimes documentaries can be quite upsetting, but I've noticed that my urge, at least these past couple weeks, is to watch a lot of documentaries. As you can see, there's probably at least 2 a week because I've just been wanting to watch so much, and I just added a lot more to Netflix, so they'll be going, there'll be more to come, but remember that I'll be doing this for, I think we're at 41 as of this moment, but only reviewing the 40 at this point. There's been a lot, and there's plenty of time to watch other things. But let's get back to Blackfish. So this movie follows the controversy about SeaWorld and having the orcas in captivity, or known as killer whales. And this movie has what we call is an advocacy documentary. Like, this movie was made for a specific reason, to target something and to make us believe something. Now, I'm not saying what this movie presents us as false. I'm not also saying it's really true. I mean, I'm sure there are cases when there are false and true things in this movie. However, it is biased. It comes at a point and wants us to look at something specifically. And some documentaries do this. Others do a better job of not doing it. Now, in the sense of it being an advocacy documentary, it was very effective. I mean, watching this movie, I'm sure it will frustrate viewers. I'm sure it'll anger viewers. It is a movie that is quite shocking. You learn a lot. I mean, for being a kid who, went to SeaWorld when I was younger, I haven't been in a very, very long time, but being a kid, you had no idea about how these animals got there, which is talked about, how they all come from one bloodline. I mean, it's a very fascinating documentary. You're going to learn a lot, we have to kind of keep in mind that this is made from one certain bias, and just because there's a movie about it doesn't mean it's full truth. And again, I'm not here to argue if Blackfish is telling truth or lies. I'm just saying, just because you've seen it doesn't mean it's the only thing you have to believe. Me and Josh Bell, my good friend, got in a talk about this on Twitter, and we're discussing, it's a good documentary. I think that there's a lot of good and entertaining points. The way they present information is really effective, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the most truthful documentary out there, and that's Blackfish. Coming up next, I watched another documentary, no surprise, called Side by Side, which was made in 2012, and it's pretty much a movie directed by and written by Chris Kennelly, and stars Keanu Reeves going around interviewing great filmmakers and huge people of film to talk to them about their opinion on the great debate of digital versus film, and how movies are projected, how movies are shot, why it's beneficial, there's benefits of shooting digitally, and why it's beneficial of shooting on film. And, I think this is a movie where you might see the mass appeal because you have James Cameron, Martin Scorsese, David Lynch, David Fincher, Steven Soderbergh. You have all these great filmmakers sitting here and talking to you about movies. However, I do think that it does kind of become, around the midway point, a pretty niche conversation. I think you have to really be in love with motion pictures and movies and film, or be in the industry. I'm not saying that no one can enjoy it unless you're in those, but I think it's specifically more for them, because the things they start talking about become very detailed and very specific, and talking about different camera models. And for some people that might end up being real boring, where they would just like to kind of hear more of a broad conversation. But overall, I thought this documentary was good. I don't know how memorable it was. I don't think this is a documentary that I say, oh man, what a great movie. I think that Well, it's like watching multiple interviews spliced together, I guess you could say. And I mean, I guess in a sense that's what a lot of documentaries are, but it's more of just this conversation that people who are involved in the industry or critics or they've heard about, they've heard the argument. Tarantino most recently did the Hateful Eight, and that's gotten a lot of the whole it's shot on film, watch it projected on film, opposed to digital, and that conversation has been kind of resurrected because of that, but he's not the only one doing it. Christopher Nolan's also a person who likes to shoot on film, and this is a really interesting documentary if you're interested in that, or if you care about what films were shot first on digitally and why they project on digitally, what their plan is in the future, how will film look in the future. Then this is a documentary for you, but I don't think it's just for anybody. I think it's very specific. A great compilation of these real interviews and hearing these legends talk about their opinions, but not so much in an entertaining movie, I don't think I would say. The following day, I watched the Inbetweeners movie, which came out in 2011, which follows the UK series The Inbetweeners. Now, I don't know if I've ever reviewed that show on this YouTube channel or talked about it on the podcast before, but I'm a huge fan of the Inbetweeners show. My good friend Michael Smith, who used to be on the podcast quite often, turned me on to the show, which I really enjoyed. It's about these group of kids going through high school in the UK and just their experiences and, being ridiculous boys. And sometimes, and what's funny is most of the time they're not being good. They're not being like decent people. Most of them are kind of ridiculous and mean and really pervish, but there's something kind of charming about them, and this show has heart. So going into the first movie, it's been a while since I revisited the show, but I like the show, I like the movie. However, I think this is one of those cases where if I hadn't seen the show, I would have hated the movie. And you know what? I saw the Inbetweeners 1 and the Inbetweeners 2. So I'm just going to combine those two because I feel very similar about both of them. I think, personally, I preferred... I think they're about the same in my book, Inbetweeners 1 and 2. If you look on Rotten Tomatoes or other websites, it seems Inbetweeners 2 is more liked by critics and fans. But I think it's one of those situations where if I wasn't already invested in these characters, I probably would have hated both these films. They're crass, they're silly, they're childish. I mean, there's toilet humor, there's puking humor, but because I care about these characters, because I've watched them for some time and I have that investment built, I'm a little bit more forgiving. But overall, I felt both movies are only okay. I think the show is a tremendous amount better, especially with the second film, which I watched as well this week. So that's 2 movies, remember that. Because I feel like it just got totally crass and just totally lost sight of that heart behind all these characters. I mean, there's kind of a nice moment at the end when these characters think they're in grave danger. But overall, I think these 2 movies are forgettable and pretty much should have stopped at the show. In between the Inbetweeners 1 and 2, I watched The Inbetweeners on Wednesday, this movie on Thursday, and The Inbetweeners 2 on Friday. But on Thursday, I watched The Freshman, the 1990s film. As you remember, the first week, I watched The Freshman, the Harold Lloyd comedy silent film. But this one is the 1990 comedy starring Matthew Broderick and Marlon Brando. Now, this was a movie that I have seen the cover for hundreds of times. Always kind of wanted to watch it, and just so happened to be on television. On DirecTV, so there was no commercial or anything. And I was like, all right, cool, I'll watch it. And it was really early in the morning, but I was like, hey, let's do this. Even though I was going to be watching Zoolander 2 later that evening, and I could have done that movie, I said, no, let me do this. Zoolander 2, if you're interested, you can find my review up here in the white eye. Click it, a bunch of links drop down. You could also see my review for Deadpool and my other updates. The Freshman, I think, is one of the best examples of an actor recreating or kind of reprising as a famous role that he's done, and done it with such, I'm not sure what the word, but such a way that it's not totally replicating the character. It's showing homage to that character, but it really kind of makes it fun and enjoyable. We've seen people, Arnold Schwarzenegger do this, we've seen Sylvester Stallone do this, but in this case, watching Marlon Brando play the Godfather-like character, he plays a person who was who inspired The Godfather. He was the guy that they took notes on to create the Godfather movie, in this film, obviously. And basically this movie is about Matthew Broderick, a kid, I forget where, but who moves to New York City to become a filmmaker, gets involved with Marlon Brando's character, and ends up becoming his little right-hand man, or his errand boy. And it's about their connection, and how he meets Marlon Brando's daughter, who decides that they're going to get married. And it's a very charming, silly movie that's actually quite fun. I mean, it put a smile on my face. I think it's quite funny. I think it's quite charming, but obviously I think the whole movie works around the charisma from Matthew Broderick and Marlon Brando. Friday, I watched The Inbetweeners 2. Saturday night, I watched Big Night, the film from 1996 from Stanley Tucci and Campbell Scott. Stars Stanley Tucci, Mark Anthony, Tony Shalhoub. This was interesting because I am a huge fan of Monk. If you guys have ever seen that television show starring Tony Shalhoub, sorry, I didn't mean to shake the camera. It's quite hard to watch him in anything else now. But watching this movie this is a foodie movie, okay? Like, we have Burnt this year, we had Chef last year. This is a foodie movie that will make you drool, and it's also such a fascinating movie about these really interesting, complex characters. You know, going in, I was expecting this one type of movie, and ended up being completely different. This movie is charming. It has these really fascinating characters who become even more fascinating when they're in the kitchen. Just watching them interact and them dealing with their problems. Stanley Tucci is dealing with this girl that he's seeing and the other things that he has going on the side. I won't get into that. And then we have Tony Shalhoub, who plays his brother, who is dedicated to cooking, and when someone doesn't like what he serves, he has a problem with it, and he wants to confront them. And it's that passion. But when they're both in the kitchen and they're both talking about what's going on out there, or when their heads are together cooking and baking, it is it's just fascinating to watch. And like I said, it'll make your mouth drool. A wonderful, fun movie, lighthearted. But like I said, the main thing here are how great the characters are. And wrapping it up, last night I watched another documentary, I know, called Hot Girls Wanted, which got which was majorly talked about last year. Came out in 2015. Netflix released it, and basically kind of gives us focuses on the amateur porn industry. And yes, I know she said the word porn. You know, I think even talking to people and tweeting about it, people are kind of like, oh man, he's talking about something bad. You know, I mean, this is something that's part of culture. It's part of our society. It's part of our culture, and it is something that we are dealing with as a society. And it's not something that we don't have to be hush hush about. You know, I think it's something that can be talked about. And this documentary is not dirty. It's not. Well, I mean, that's depending on who's watching it. But this documentary is not. You know, it talks about these real girls who are getting involved in this industry, the amateur porn industry. And, you know, statistics will anger and upset viewers easily. I think a lot of people will watch this and be disgusted and be angered. I think that this movie also tried to say a lot. Like I just said, you know, this conversation has something to do with our culture and our society and the way... you know, the way we use the internet. I mean, all of this is factored. And I think these filmmakers, who are actually two journalists, Jill Bauer and Rhonda Gradis, who wanted to kind of communicate that, but all of their messages kind of get muddled. And this movie isn't necessarily anti-porn. It's not, don't watch it, it's evil. But it also kind of shows what it does to these girls and how these girls are sometimes treated, even though in some parts of the documentary, the girls are defending what they do and they don't feel that they need to be spoken for. An interesting look, but a very, very focused look. It's not a very widespread, like I said, it's on a certain aspect in the industry. Focuses on kind of 5 girls and how they are introduced and sometimes exit the industry. But I think that there was so much going on, there was so much they wanted to say in the hour and 24 minutes that their messages kind of become muddled. I don't think it's a very eye-opening documentary. I don't think it's surprising to anybody. I don't think it's, you know, like, oh, this documentary is going to show us something we've never seen before. I think it gives people who really know, who've never kind of... I think it gives people kind of an eye-opener for some people who don't really... sorry, that was my chair. how can I word this? I think it gives people a look and a reminder, just how created the film, the adult film industry is, and how fiction it is. However, sometimes that it could leave lasting effects on these girls, and it's just the process. And to me, I thought it was interesting. I thought some scenes were more powerful than others. There's a scene when a young girl has to tell her mother about what she's decided to do. But I think that there's so much that these filmmakers wanted to say that it kind of falls on deaf ears because it's so much going on in such a short period of time. That's going to wrap it up for this week. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning into this video. That is my Week 6 update. Next week, I'll be doing Week 7 and excited to tell you what I've watched. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. Never forget to tune into my videos. I'll be doing updates every single Monday and also, of course, movie reviews every Friday. Also, let me know what you feel about these films down here in the comment sections below. Give this film a thumbs up. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Jake Tiranno, and please continue chasing cinema.